This is kind of a big deal because we have heard a lot of griping and complaining about the college football playoff committee. But over the last couple of days, I think we've seen both the Big 12 and the ACC go on the offensive. And sources close to both of those conferences tell us here at the Monty Show that has been a coordinated offensive, a coordinated effort that involves communication between both commissioners, both leagues. There was a meeting Tuesday in Dallas that we told you about here on the show with Big 12 and ACC presidents, a select group of them that met with Smash Capital. There's a lot of synergy between the ACC and the Big 12 right now. And we are told in a Monty Show exclusive that the Big 12 and the ACC are working together on their messaging as they go on the offensive against the college football playoff. And frankly, I think it is exactly what they should be doing. You're going to hear from Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark in just a moment. But I want to remind you about Jim Phillips, the commissioner of the ACC. I want to remind you about Cam Ward, some of the biggest names in the ACC, going on the offensive, talking about the injustice that they felt like the College Football Playoff Committee perpetrated against Miami and Cam Ward and the ACC by putting Alabama in instead of Miami. I also think then I need to point you to all of the voices in the Big 12 talking about the disparity that has been going on, where the Big 12 is being ranked behind the G5 and is in an enviable position of not having its first round bye intact because Boise State would, let's say, theoretically win the Mountain West Championship, and they then would get a bye instead of the Big 12 champion. And it's very interesting that an administrator, an executive like Brett Yormark, who is so cool and calculated, absolutely dropped bombs on the College Football Playoff Committee and the G5.
The committee continues to show time and time again that they are paying attention to logos versus resumes. I've said that before. I want to say it again. And I say logos because they're concentrating on team logos and conference logos. Strength of schedule should matter. And wins against Power 4 opponents should matter. 74% of the Big 12 wins were against Power 4 opponents this season. Meanwhile, the group of five is 11-80. I want to say that again. 11-80 versus Power 4 teams this season. And in no way should a group of five champion be ranked above our champion. And I'm going to say that one more time. In no way should a group of five champion be ranked above our champion.
First of all, homie, can we get a better camera angle?
Bro.
As much as I love the jawline there, Brett.
I mean, I know that this isn't like your commissioner or anything. This is just some guy who works in the basement, right?
But I'm going to play you another bite, and I want you to hear and pay attention to the calculation, the scripting, the messaging. This is not accidental. This is not emotional. This is planned. This is scripted. This is on message. Brett Yormark bringing stats, bringing numbers, bringing facts to the argument, facts that as he sees them, obviously, where he's saying there is no way that you can rank a group of five team ahead of any of our members. And he wants the focus to be on wins and losses on the field.
ASU and ISU each played 10 games against the Big 12, SEC, and Big 10, winning both P4 non-conference games against the SEC and the Big 10, and winning 7 of 9 P4 conference games. Boise played one game against the Big 10 and lost, and that was their only P4 opponent. The committee clearly focuses on the wins and loss column. Going by that principle, no 3-loss team from a Power 4 conference should get a bye over a 2-loss champion from the Big 12. I'm going to say that again. No 3-loss team from a Power 4 conference should get a bye over a 2-loss champion from the Big 12.
I mean, I can't say he's wrong. I certainly don't disagree with him. I think I've made that exact same case about Boston State all season long. They don't play anybody. Strength of schedule does not seem to matter. What you did on the field, in my opinion, is just as important as who you did it against. Unless you're the college football playoff committee and you're going to elevate a G5 champion over the Big 12. And I am amazed by that. But again, I want to point out, this is scripted. There are statistics. There are talking points. This is Brett Yormark. This is Jim Phillips from the ACC. And I think if you look at what Jim Phillips said yesterday in this statement, look how similar it is. Look at the messaging. Now, he didn't show us his ceiling tiles and his jawline, Jim Phillips didn't. But you look at this messaging. As we look ahead to the final rankings, we hope the committee will reconsider and put a deserving Miami in the field. We'll continue to look forward to this weekend when Clemson and SMU have an opportunity to earn an ACC championship and represent the college, the conference in the CFP. I think you look at the messaging, it's almost identical. Miami has more wins and fewer losses than teams directly ahead of them, and a dominant victory over an SEC team whose late season surge includes a win over 13 Ole Miss. The messaging is exactly the same. And I think when you listen to these two commissioners, my sources made it very clear. They are working in lockstep. And I guess my question that I would put at your feet, does any of this matter? Does any of this have an impact? Can the Big 12 and the ACC get the SEC and the Big 10 to move and come back to the table to talk about either altering the college football playoff, or what I am told is, how are we going to transition to this bigger, badder, private money, smash capital, Rudy Project model for college football and determining a college football champion? That's ultimately what the Big 12 and the ACC are angling for. The Big 12 and the ACC want to move the SEC and the Big 10 back to the table and figure out a super league. And Jake, I just don't know that they have the leverage to do that.
And I think the biggest challenge with it is that you know, the Big 10 and the SEC just don't have to do anything they don't want to do at this point. And so it's a classic scenario of the ACC and the Big 12 having to decide just how aggressive they want to be and in what way do they want to be aggressive. You know, as an example of this, like, they could be aggressive in trying to force, you know, the Big 10 and the SEC to come back to the table. They could also be aggressive if they wanted to be in working together to create their own opportunities, you know? And so it really comes down to how Brett Yormark and Jim Phillips and their member institutions see the future and how they want to go about that future. Because ultimately, you know, the things that Brett is saying and the things that Jim has said in that statement are not incorrect. You know, the numbers are the numbers. Obviously, they're not in dispute. But at the same time, I think that you play a dangerous game when, you know, everybody wanted to transition away from the BCS and go to the college football playoff model and have a committee. And then we want to sit here and talk about how there's not equal opportunity. Last time I checked in sports, equal opportunity was never a prerequisite as far as winning and making all the money, right? Equal opportunity for the athletes getting on the field is, of course. But in terms of the conferences and how they go about it, that's never been a piece of the conversation. I think that's what's difficult for the Big 12 and the ACC right now is that they, you know, as I always say, haven't done enough winning. And so now they've, in a sense, been left behind. You know, the SEC and the Big 10, from a financial perspective, are miles ahead of you. From an opportunistic perspective, they're miles ahead of you. And clearly, as everybody agrees with, you know, the SEC specifically has a huge bias with the College Football Playoff Committee. So again, it just comes back to, what are you willing to do to change the narrative? And I think we don't know the answer to that yet for the Big 12 and the ACC, but I think that's why you see these two working together to send a clear message.
Yeah, and I also think one of the things that is being, you know, left under the radar here, if you will, is the absolute, is it disparity? Is it unfairness? Is it this idea that playing in a conference championship game is a good thing? I think there is no doubt that both the ACC and the Big 12 understand that their teams participating in conference championship games is bad for business. If you are SMU, you are either winning the conference championship or you are out of the college football playoff. And frankly, if you're SMU, if you're Clemson, if you're Iowa State, if you're ASU, whoever the two teams are that lose those games are out of the college football playoff. It's bad for business. Is that the case in the SEC or the Big Ten? No. No, it's not. Those four teams will be in. And I think when you look at the way that the college football playoff is shaping itself, and now you begin to understand what these conference championship games look like, and you start looking at these graphics, and you say to yourself, boy, this is a problem. If you're Iowa State, look at Iowa State and Arizona State. Look at this. Iowa State, where Iowa State is 16th. Arizona State, well, they're 15th. So you have nowhere to go but down. If you lose, you're done. You look at the ACC, I don't think anybody questions that if SMU at number 8 loses to Clemson, they're done.
Right.
There's no doubt Clemson's only way in is to win the conference championship game. Is there any question about that? But if you're Penn State and Oregon, it doesn't matter who loses that game. You're both getting in.
Well, and here's the crux of the situation, because I really think that this is the part that people don't like talking about, but I do think it is the reality of it. The reality is that we look at this graphic and we have the ability to say, okay, if Penn State and Arizona State matched up, depending on who you asked, a lot of people, I think the majority of people would, like maybe 70%, 7 out of 10 people would probably say, hey, Penn State's going to beat Arizona State. So the problem we have in college football is that whether it's true or not that Penn State would beat Arizona State, the perception is that they would. And
yeah.
I personally believe Arizona State would give Penn State everything that they can handle.
I think Arizona State would win that game.
But that's just our opinion, right?
Yep.
Like the perception nationally is that, oh, well, hey, it's the Big Ten, it's Penn State, Penn State's played Ohio State and all this, like they would beat Arizona State. And that's what I'm telling you, the biggest issue for these two conferences is, whether it's Arizona State, SMU, like you're sitting here having your commissioner on a terrible camera angle talk about stats and analytics. And I do think he's got a strong case against Boise State, 100%. But you don't have a strong case against the SEC because nobody in the room agrees that you would beat the SEC.
Well, but I also think the ACC is in a far weaker position here. Miami doesn't belong in the college football playoff. They're not one of the 12. Jeez.
Bless you.
Thank you, sir. They're not one of the 12 best teams in the country.
Right.
I don't know how you make the case that Miami belongs in over Alabama. People get hung up on the 3-loss thing. What I'm telling you is get hung up on the resume, get hung up on the strength of schedule, get hung up on who you beat and who you didn't beat.
Yeah.
Miami doesn't have a case over Alabama.
Well, and I think you should get hung up on the fact that Miami's just lost too much overall.
And their defense is terrible.
Yeah.
Their defense is not good. So you can't look at Miami. I think when it comes to this conversation about Boise State, and the conference, and again, the conference champion loser is out and Boise State's going to be in. That's an awfully difficult road to hoe. The fact that when we look at the rankings, BYU is 18th and Boise State's 10th. You really think there's that much disparity between Arizona State and Boise State? Does Boise State hold up on Arizona State's schedule? Absolutely, they do not. They don't.
Yeah.
They don't. And that's where you should be looking at this disparity. And I think I again go back to this question of are SMU and Boise State worthy of first-round buys when you look at these rankings?
Well, I think the clear difference is that SMU's playing in a Power 4 conference. So that's the clear upper hand they would have on Boise State. Now, obviously, the ACC is, in my opinion, the weakest of the Power 4 here. I mean, I just don't know how you get away from that in football. Basketball is obviously a different conversation, but in football, there's no question that you're the weakest or the second weakest. And again, I don't know how, for the committee, you look at strength of schedule and you put Boise State ahead of even SMU, because I think, again, if Boise State was undefeated and had beaten Oregon, then we obviously are able to have a different conversation.
Yeah.
But because you lost to the only power team you played, I just don't understand how the committee gets off looking at this saying, well, hey, they're, what were they, 10th or whatever they were, 12th?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know how you get off putting them in that slot, because, again, you look at the teams that are just directly behind them. You're damn right, I'm taking Bama, I'm taking Miami, I'm taking Ole Miss, I'm even taking South Carolina.
And ASU.
I'm probably taking every team up to UNLV on that graphic.
Over Boise.
Over Boise, yeah. Yeah, 100%. Yep.
Yeah, I think this is a very difficult conversation, and it's why I think that this story about the ACC and the Big 12 talking about the future, and it is something that I think is vitally important. And the question that lingers here now, and if you're just tuning into the show, we have an exclusive story for you this morning about the ACC and the Big 12 in tandem, messaging against the college football playoff in a very aggressive manner, meeting with Smash Capital. And I think this goes back to what we talked about a couple of weeks ago when Baylor's president tried to get the Big Ten and the SEC and every Power 4 president in a room in Dallas this week to listen to Smash Capital's presentation. And essentially the SEC and the Big Ten raised a big middle finger and said, we're not coming. And so you had a handful of ACC and Big 12 commissioners sit there, listen to what I am told was a really compelling, and I think this is really important in the way that this was described to me, a really compelling and realistic model for creating a college football super league. Realistic model, compelling model for creating a college football super league. And the Big 12 and the ACC are very well aware that that is their only path to consistently competing on a level field with the SEC and the Big 10. The question is, and I think it is the elephant in the room, what is it going to take to get the SEC and the Big 10 to come back to the table to talk about a college football super league? And I got to be honest with you, I don't know the answer to that question, because they just don't have to do it if they don't want to.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Like, I just don't think that, the ACC and the Big 12 are their hand is being forced here, because, again, it's the first year of the 12-team playoff, and here we are talking about these two conferences essentially being left out. I mean, obviously your conference champion is going to get in, but I don't know. And maybe this is also a bigger issue that is just kind of coming to the surface in the real world. Because I know on this show, we've talked about it at length, that, I mean, almost on a daily basis, that the Big 12 and the ACC are going to get one team, and you shouldn't be surprised by that. And people were like, oh, well, you're crazy, well-moneying us to, Mars. Like, you guys were shocked that we said, hey, these two conferences are going to get one team each, and the rest of it's going to be the Big 10 and the SEC. Yet here we are, and what are we talking about? Hey, conference champion, and that's it. And these, the Big 10 and the SEC are going to fill the rest of those slots. And then obviously you've got your G5. So again, maybe the issue is that the Jim Phillips of the world and the Brett Yormarks of the world weren't ready for this. Or maybe they thought it was just going to go differently. Maybe they assumed they were going to get two teams, or they would have the opportunity, depending on how the season shook out, to get a third team. And that's just not the case. And
No.
I think that now that that's sort of set in, and now that these two, and I'm assuming most of their membership have accepted that fate, now it's like, all right, now we got to start making an impact. Now we need to work together to message against these two and try to break the cycle. And again, I'm just telling you, I don't know how you break the cycle other than to complain and complain and complain and message and message and message, or you're going to have to create your own thing, which is what I've been saying about the G5 for a year on this show at this point. The G5 needs their own college football playoff or whatever, their own championship system, so that we don't have to deal with, a weak ass strength of schedule Boise State trying to say that they should be on the same field as power teams. And until that happens, we're going to sit here and be in this same conundrum every single season. Guarantee you a year from now on the show, we're going to be talking about someone getting piped in the college football playoff, just like we were last year. And, if you think that the 12-team playoff is going to fix that, I just think you haven't been paying attention. And that's the issue.
I think it is going to be very difficult to get the SEC and the Big Ten to move. And the only way you're going to do that is Brett Yormark is going to have to lead the line. Jim Phillips, and with all due respect, I continue to hear this. I know I've said it on the show. Jim Phillips just doesn't carry much water in this town. And I think that is a harsh reality. There is no question Florida State and Clemson have weakened Jim Phillips. There's just no doubt about that. Yeah. Their lawsuits and their bickering have weakened the ACC's position and Jim Phillips by extension.
Well, and look at the success SMU is having. I mean, how bad of a look is SMU?
And you know what? It's funny you bring that up. I had this conversation yesterday with a college administrator, and the prevailing opinion is that SMU playing for a conference championship, and there's a lot of people who think they're going to win this game.
Yeah.
If SMU beats Clemson, most people think it is a very bad thing for the ACC.
Because it's garbage.
It is a very bad thing when the team that you brought in, the university you brought in SMU, on a free pass. Because remember, the ACC is not paying SMU media rights distribution. They said, no, we'll come in for free. If that team in year one wins your conference championship, that's a terrible look for this conference.
Yep.
And the irony is obviously Florida State is Garbo this year and has been terrible the entire year.
Yep.
And they're the ones who said bringing in SMU, Cal, Stanford was absolutely bad for business, weaken the brand, cost them money. And now SMU comes in and wins the league. Like, it's a bad look for the ACC. And I think, again, and I know that this is a Big 12 truck stop that has a bunch of planes flying over at conference show.
Right.
Brett Yormark is leading the line. Brett Yormark is the one pulling the rope on behalf of really everybody not named the Big Ten in the SEC.
Mm-hmm.
He is in a leadership position here, and he is the one spurring this move to a super league or a new model, a new way of doing business in college football for these leagues. And I'm not surprised by it at all. And with our sources telling us that the ACC and the Big 12 are in constant communication and have talked this week about how to message the damage that the college football playoff, essentially the SEC, is doing to the Big 12 and the ACC, I think should surprise nobody.
Yeah, and I think that, ultimately this path leads to no joy for anybody. I mean, this sort of pitting the ACC and the Big 12 against these two, I'm telling you, is going to lead to negative consequences for the SEC and the Big 10 in some form or fashion. Now, are those just small consequences? Hey, we got to make changes, or maybe. But I'm telling you, it's not good for the sport when the power conferences are against each other. And I think that the reality is all of this is solved for the Big 12 and the ACC by winning. Again, if you can, in the college football playoff, if you can have an ACC team or a Big 12 team go in and beat the big boys. And I'm not even saying they got to win a national championship, but if we can get another TCU, that's going to be really, really healthy for the Big 12 or the ACC in terms of this conversation, because all the numbers say that, yeah, your strength of schedule is strong. You're playing good competition, but the problem is this isn't really a numbers conversation. It's a perception conversation.
And what is the real problem for the Big 12? Dave Aranda, Joey McGuire, Sonny Dykes, and Mike Gundy. Huge problems in this league. You look at the brands that need to be pulling this league along, and you don't have one. You don't have a nameplate. You don't have a team that's the overlord of this league. With Utah struggling, I think BYU showed you that you have a brand in BYU who just couldn't get it over the line because they're not Texas. They're not Oklahoma. They're not Texas A&M. They're not Nebraska.
Yeah, they've been here before.
They're not the power brands that used to be the foundation of the Big 12. You have no university in this league in really, let's be honest, you have no football team in the Big 12 that has experience winning at the highest level consistently.
Right.
You have, and if we're being honest, TCU in recent times was what TCU did in the college football playoff, 3 years ago now? Aren't we saying that was a fluke? I think so. Who's the team in this league that has consistently competed for national championships?
Yeah, there's not one.
Well,
what about Texas? Well, Texas didn't consistently compete for national championships
until they left the conference.
Yeah.
Texas is back, and then they left the conference.
Yeah.
And I look at BYU, who's got their 1984 national championship. What does that mean today?
Yeah.
You've got back-to-back Rose Bowl appearances in Pac-12 champions in Utah. What does that mean today? Nothing. You have no brand. You have no power team. And when I talk about those coaches, and you guys ride me because I say Dave Aranda should be fired. And yesterday, I can't remember who it was saying that Baylor had a great season. They beat the worst teams in this conference, and there's a lot of worse teams in this conference.
Yeah.
At least in the ACC, you have Florida State. You have Clemson. For whatever Dabo is, that's a cat who won a national championship and competed multiple times. Florida State's a power football brand. Miami is a power football brand. You do not have that in the Big 12.
Yeah, I mean, if you said to someone, hey, who do you think is going to win a national championship sooner, Florida State or Texas Tech? Well, you're obviously going to say Florida State, right? Florida State or Utah? You're probably going to say Florida State. Florida State or Colorado? You're probably going to say Florida State.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the problem, is that when you go apples,
it's not the problem,
apples,
it's the reality.
Yeah, I mean, it's the reality of the situation, but for the Big 12, that's the perception problem I'm talking about. People don't believe that if you're in the college football playoff, it's the classic, recess playground issue, right? Like, hey, you're putting together a two-hand touch football game on the schoolyard, and you're getting picked last because nobody believes that you're going to help them, and that's the issue. Is that the Big 12, is a conference that is just underachieving. And I love Brett Yormark. I believe he is the right guy for the job. I believe that Baylor not firing Dave has nothing to do with Brett Yormark, and that Brett, if he had his way, would clean house in like 5 of these programs and revamp them and reboot them, because that's what needs to happen. But again, it's this whole situation of, hey, do the old white hairs who lead these universities have any understanding of athletics? Because it doesn't seem like you do. And frankly, at some point, athletics and athletics' ability to make your institution money has to start mattering to the academia in the Big 12. And I just don't think
there's
it does.
Too much money at stake to just toe the line.